Thought Thursday. What's our topic today? We're talking about supply chain issues. If you read Joel's Voice of Business yesterday, you'll know that Canada is still struggling to get supplies through different outlets, largely due to China's strict lockdowns that have just started to end. And one of our solutions that we're going to look at today is called friendshoring or ally shoring. So we're just going to go through the pros and cons and kind of what got us to this point.
And if you're not familiar with what ally shoring is, it's instead of Canada exporting and importing, or mainly importing from different countries like Russia and China, we would be looking at different friendlier countries that we have better allies with, and getting relationships with these countries so we're not so dependent on countries in case of different like lockdowns or the war that's going on in Russia right now. If something happens, we're not suffering in the long run. So what does this mean?
Yeah. So first of all, friendshoring it's similar to onshoring or nearshoring. It's a process of bringing your supply chain back into Canada or into a country that's closer or that we have an established kind of connection with. So an example that was in one of the articles is instead of going to, let's say, Taiwan, who is experiencing political unrest with the threat of China invading, kind of similar to Ukraine and Russia, moving some of our sources that we're getting from Taiwan into South Korea and sourcing it from there instead. Now, South Korea is also not super stable, North Korea. So there's a lot of issues with trying to move stuff between countries.
Absolutely. And with moving, I mean, we can say that we're going to stop importing as much from China at the moment. However, their growth technology is not, you can't really get that anywhere else. Exactly. So you can import from different countries, like Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, but you're still not going to get the volume in which we're getting from China, as well as that some sources are saying that there'll be repercussions if you stop trading with these countries. Exactly. So now, right now, we're exporting about 22 billion to China right now in waste, ash, pulp, wood, oils, cereals. And what would that mean to our economic output as well? And another factor that we have to look at is that if we are going to be starting importing from these smaller countries, prices are still going to go up. Even if there is more exporting coming in, more supplies that we're getting, we're still not going to get the same prices. So our businesses in the countries are still going to have higher prices that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and the reason that those prices would increase if we're looking at moving it out of, like, let's say China or other countries that are relatively unstable, like Russia, is that we would be looking at countries that would have better human rights, a higher wage, higher cost of living, and they offset that by increasing the cost of their goods. So instead of paying like 60 cents for some of these items that we're putting in cell phones and putting in all these electronics that we're sourcing right now from China, we're going to be paying closer to $1.60 or even more for the same product.
Sure, absolutely. There are some human rights issues, like you imagine, that we have to look at as well. If we are going to be stopping from China and Taiwan is definitely a country that would suffer greatly if we stopped. And they're not, I mean, like you said, they really don't have a whole lot of choices. They either upset China, which they're not going to want to do, or they're losing a huge export. So there's a lot of factors to think about in these issues.
Definitely. And one of the things that was discussed in one of the articles that we were looking at is actually that kind of that issue of taking all these resources from a country that's not doing so well, like that is causing their GDP to fall. It's causing the global GDP to fall, which can cause more political unrest, which then influences the entire world economy, which implements so many things. We won't even get into that.
Absolutely.
But it's just like a domino effect when you kind of pull out resources from a country that is barely surviving.
Absolutely. I mean, there are benefits. You're creating allies and ties to different countries like Indonesia that maybe can help. You can help that country. So I see it as doing it in smaller bits and making ties with countries that we could have, but not a full out ally shoring. It seems impossible to do it completely.
I think it would definitely be small steps towards a whole friendshoring if that was even ever going to be the solution. And the whole idea behind friendshoring, like why we are even discussing it, is because it brings our supply chains closer to us and it causes us to source out multiple suppliers instead of just one single supplier. Which would hopefully help us build resilience for our supply chains.
Yes.
So instead of where we're relying on China and these factories in China to be the sole supplier of all these different resources, and that's where we've seen a lot of our supply chain just get cut over the last few months with COVID. We would have, like, let's say someplace in Indonesia, someplace in Taiwan, someplace in Malaysia, all making the same thing. If one of them happened to, I don't know, have a fire, have some kind of issue where they had to shut down that supply chain, we still have two others that are providing that same product.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing to think about, is that we would need a second step. We need a plan B. Yes. And I think in this global economy with the pandemic, we've learned that things can happen. There can be a war, there can be a pandemic. So we need another option in case something like that happens. So the supply chain doesn't stop like it did before during the early pandemics, yes, when all of a sudden all of these trade exports were being used for medical supplies and Canada couldn't get or take out anything.
Yes.
So, I mean, the solution is, do we wait for COVID to stop,
2.0,
which it may settle down and China may not have the lockdowns that it's having now, and we can continue as usual. Or like you said, can we start dealing with some of the other countries to get these products in? I mean, our biggest export and import right now is the US.
Yeah.
And they're investing really highly right now in electric vehicles, which is helping Canada with our chains. And I think that's what's making our government invest highly, especially the Ontario government, of investing in Canadian and Ontario manufacturing right now. Yeah. But I just want to point out that another reason that for me, the federal government right now is looking to do more at home, but we have nickel that is definitely up for mining, but that brings on more environmental issues, and there is Indigenous also negotiations that come with that. So, I mean, yes, we could mine nickel here and copper here, but what is the price to pay? Because once we start, we can't undo some of those things.
Exactly.
So or we could get some of these exports from like the Congo, which definitely have some human rights issues. So there is a lot to unpack, obviously, in these issues. And I like how you said, there isn't one good answer. There isn't one, it's not a yes or a no. It's how much do we siphon off the bigger countries and move to other imports.
I think no matter what kind of solution we come up with trying to find a different supply chain, there's going to be that initial cost of investment. And it's very evident, like extremely evident, that we need to invest in our supply chain. I know that 67% of CEOs do plan to increase their investments in the supply chain. specifically into intelligent automation, supply chain visibility, and AI-driven analytics. So that was from a survey that Joel looked into to write his Voice of Business. And it's just going to be extremely expensive. But there are countries like Japan right now who has $2 billion set aside in funding that they are offering to businesses in Japan that are willing to pull out some of their supply chains from China and find a different option. So I don't know. There's a lot to kind of debate here.
And there isn't any wrong way to invest in Ontario. If we're investing in technology, we're going to increase jobs. When you think about 20, 15 years ago, the manufacturing has completely changed in Ontario, especially with our car manufacturers. So if you're going to be increasing that, there is no wrong way to invest in Ontario jobs and Ontario technology. And if we could become a bigger name in these supplies, then it can just help us in the long run. I just think we have to be careful on exactly what we're willing to sacrifice.
Yes. And like you say, bringing stuff into Ontario or bringing it back to Canada, there are pros, but there is costs. Like Canada's supply chain, like our ways to transport items out to the rest of Ontario and to the rest of Canada, they're broken. They need to be reinvigorated and have money put back into them. And I think one of the reports we were looking at said it was going to cost roughly $259 billion over 5 years in Ontario alone to get our supply network to where it needs to be to support the demand of our consumers.
Yeah. I mean, I believe the businesses in Ontario said that the raw materials for manufacturers has gone up a fifth just this year.
Yeah.
So we aren't seeing a change in prices for cost of living anytime soon.
Yeah. So what do we want our members to think about from this?
Do you know where your supplies are coming from? Are you willing to pay a little bit more for your goods if you know it's coming from a more stable country? Are you willing to pay a little bit more, or are you wanting to buy all things from allied countries?
Yeah. Allied countries, or is there kind of a mixture between ally shoring, near shoring, offshoring, and onshoring? Is there a happy medium to all of these different types of supply chain solutions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Tell us your thoughts.
And we'll see you next Thursday. Bye.